This guy be like, oh, I took 500 milligrams of test. This is how I feel.
You start to see.
And then you're like, I guess I'll do that.
It's also for guys. A lot of times, guys like me, if I go on, the only reason a guy like me is going to go on is he wants to look closer to that.
Yeah.
Problem is that's
What's up guys, Derek, MorePlaySmartDates.com. Today we are going to be reacting to the Fighter and the Kid clips. Mark Harley's tips for steroid users. A lot of you guys have asked me to cover this. Comment section, refreshing it. And let's see what it looks like, see if there's anything about me in here. I've had it loaded up for a few days now and have not checked the comment section. Let's see, of course Brendan knows about this topic. He looks like he's about to turn into werewolf. Delt Daddy reaction coming soon. Yeah, so here I fucking am. MPMD has entered the chat. Let's react to this.
54.
Why fuck with it?
I wouldn't. Right. Yeah, if I were you, because you're
as much as I'd love to see you on steroids, don't fuck with it.
It's an experiment that I always, anytime somebody asks me about, I'm like, have an exit strategy. If you're not committing to this for the rest of your life,
that's the problem.
Have an exit strategy because I've guys that come to me and.
Is Brian Callum making jokes about he's going to get on gear again and not doing it?
He'll get on TRT or something and then stop after like 3 weeks. I'm like,
I swear to God, I'm just going to inject my ass on the fucking camera, guys.
What the fuck are you doing? Like, you just fucked your endocrine system up where you have to, like, you're not taking the right shit afterwards. Now you're going to be depressed. You're going to lose all the muscle that you
it does that to you?
It's a science.
Because it shuts off. If you put in any amount of testosterone into your body exogenously, your body's going to be like, oh, you got it. Okay.
Your nuts stop working.
Yeah.
So that's why guys nuts shrink.
How does one get off of it?
You take compounds like HCG, Clomid, Nolvadex, these things that will prompt your body to start making it. But if you don't do that, it doesn't necessarily fix itself.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
Yeah, so that is indeed, a lot of truth in what he just said. Obviously, it depends on the duration of exposure as well as what compound's chosen, how much of an active life does it have. Like if you pop one Anavar tab, for example, are you going to wake up and have crushed test and need to do a PCT? Obviously not. Your gonadotropins are going to go down over time, but it's not like that instantly results in like zero tests. You still have residual tests bound to sex hormone binding globulin. You still have a residual amount of free floating androgens, and your gonadotropins don't shut down to zero like overnight either, like I said. So this is a thing that occurs with duration of exposure. Depending on the drug, is it progestogenic? Is it bound to is it esterified with an enanthate ester? Is it going to last longer in the body and result in a longer clearance where you're going to be suppressed for a longer duration of time? There's a lot of things to consider, but at the end of the day, like in general, all compounds are basically going to be suppressive in some capacity, some more so than others, but yeah. And as far as the PCT thing, do you need SERMs? Do you need compounds in a post-cycle therapy context in order to recover every single time? Not necessarily. It's just can help expedite things potentially, although there is data that certainly argues against this now. But in general, using something to kind of expedite the HPTA by, inhibiting that negative feedback that would otherwise be suppressing you and kind of, giving it encouragement to pump out gonadotropins and get things going, and or, artificially stimulating Leydig cells with something like an HCG. Again, though, this all comes back to strategizing based on your actual goals. Are you planning on staying on this shit forever? Like HCG is going to shut you down too. These are things you have to consider, despite the fact that it's literally stimulating natural endogenous testosterone production. It is also causing negative feedback, which then shuts down your hypothalamus and subsequently your pituitary. So it's not like just because you're using HCG, you're forgetting that upstream, your HP part of the TA is shut down still. So that needs to be considered too, because it's not just are your balls working, it's also is stuff up here working, which obviously is important as well. You don't want those shut off. You don't want like half the axis functioning correctly and half of it not perpetually necessarily. Although, there's arguments in many directions. At the end of the day, in general, AAS is going to be a lifelong commitment. It's not really something, in my opinion, like I guess, hypothetically for certain sports, certain acute, performance outcomes and whatnot, yeah, you can make an argument for cycles and shit, but in general, most people should be planning not to yo-yo the fuck out of their hormones year round. Rather, they should be thinking of how can I do this the most safe way possible and not expose myself to crashed hormones and then following that super physiologic amounts of hormones and going back and forth and just fucking your body up, you have to find the safest and most sustainable way to approach your, whatever it is, hormone optimization practices.
And guys have really screwed themselves up.
Yeah, and that's where you're like, oh, I took steroids.
All natty.
Your thyroid, everything gets kind of thrown off.
Everything has a consequence to it. So it's just, you're managing these side effects.
There's a science to it, and if you're going to get involved, you should probably cover all your bases.
Guys do it haphazardly, and that would just be my recommendation to anybody who's like, fucking research your shit. You know, somebody messaged me, they're like, hey,
still
if I wanted to work out more, what steroid should I take? I'm like, you're not ready to do that.
Yeah.
Because you haven't read the first sentence anywhere and you're using me like Google.
Dude, you should write a book called Steroids for Dummies.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, also,
dude, think about it. There's so much stupid shit out there. Like, especially when I was young. I would go on bodybuilding.com forums, and then it was just like trial by error. This guy'd be like, I took 500 milligrams of test. This is how I feel.
You start to see.
And then you're like, I guess I'll do that.
It's also for guys, a lot of times guys like me, if I go on, the only reason a guy like me is going to go on is he wants to look closer to that.
Yeah.
Problem is there's a genetic.
You have to be realistic
physical,
too, because the amount, and you could even see guys like this guy, Eric Konevsky.
Yeah, so like Brian Callen, for example, as far as I know, he is in his 50s and obviously genetically not like a big guy necessarily. So like you can only, what is the saying? It's like you can only make a Chihuahua can't become a Rottweiler or some shit. It can only become a bigger Chihuahua kind of thing. It's just like, it's sort of like what it comes down to when it comes to PEDs too. If you have I guess depending on anabolic response though too, because there's some guys who hyper respond even though they're pinner as fuck to begin with. So that has to be taken into consideration. But in general, guys who are, genetically not necessarily built, may have a harder time ending up like what's the likelihood that if Brian Callen sauced his fucking brains out that he'd end up looking like this guy? Pretty fucking low, especially at his age with his tolerance to anabolics and organ stress and whatnot. He would be looking at, frankly, TRT would be the only thing that would sort of make sense at his age, in my opinion, using super physiological doses of androgens to do what exactly, but obviously he's fairly content with not being a fucking mass monster by now, or else he probably would have pushed the envelope. So I don't know, the only thing that would make sense to me is looking at hormone optimization and then kind of taking it from there. And especially in your 50s, you don't want to be stressing your heart unnecessarily and trying to accrue a bank of myonuclei at the least optimal time in your life when you could have otherwise, taken advantage of your 20s and 30s to build that up. So anyway, a bit of a side tangent, but it sounds like he's fairly aware of the constraints of the cards he's been dealt, which is good because some guys don't, and they end up blasting their faces off and fucking killing themselves essentially in order to get suboptimal results and still lose at regional level shows, which is not, an ideal lifestyle in my opinion. I guess to each his own, but I mean taking grams of shit just to not even place at an entry level show and or not excel in whatever endeavor you're blasting the fuck out of these compounds for, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Even if it's for whatever, acting roles and you're trying to become the beefy fucking, hunky goddamn actor guy in whatever role you're trying to become, it might not be worth it. It might just not be in the cards for you.
Kind of got famous for he put his cycle online and he was like, I take 3,000 milligrams of test enanthate, 2,000 of test the amount you're going, this is not just twice what somebody could take and get results. You're taking, so this guy,
holy shit.
He's 24 years old or something like that.
He's only 24?
And if you see his before pics, the dude was skinny. If you could do Eric Konevsky before and after. So
that's not good.
Yeah, I actually did a video breaking down this fucking apocalypse of a cycle, which was multiple grams of shit. And it's the summary of it was basically, I think he could have got away with a lot less and achieved the same outcome. Even though in the dose response studies, the limited ones we have available, you'll find that, in general, a higher dose leads to a higher lean body mass outcome. That's within the constraints of less than a gram of shit still. Once you start to get into the grams of stuff, you start to get into the territory of, it's not a linear gains to side effect ratio, rather you're going to have diminishing returns severely, whereby pushing the envelope with more grams doesn't equate to the same difference in muscle growth outcome as a 500 versus 1,000 or even a 250 versus 500. And you can even see this in the dose response relationship studies. You'll find that you know, it'll be like double the results for the first like couple hundred milligrams, and then like 1.5 times the results for the next, and then 1.35 times the results for the next. And it does not just linearly go up by like you double your dose, you double your results. And this becomes pretty clear when guys abuse the fuck out of themselves in the grams of gear territory and don't necessarily like 5x the results just by doing that.
Detailed a cycle. Like 20 units of growth hormone a day, 300 milligrams of Anadrol, all these things where you go, and he looks like shit on stage. He will never win a bodybuilding competition. If you look at that picture,
he'll win my bodybuilding competition.
Now he looks like a buff dude for like YouTube videos, but I'm saying not to knock his like, you know, what he did to get there, but he doesn't have the
that's only
genetics
8 years, dude. That's 8 years.
Well, he was probably
but still there. 8 years to that
massive amount. I'm talking 10 to 20 times the amount that somebody with good genetics could take and get great results from. Right?
All that stuff scares me. I just want to work out.
So that's the route you want to take if you want to be a WWE guy and you're skinny, or like now he's like a YouTuber, and I think he's a good dude. I'm just like, people thought he was like exaggerating what he took. It's like, no, because if you don't have the genetics, you just have to keep cranking it, and there's diminishing returns too. You think 20 units of HGH is going to be better, like is twice as good at 10? No, it's about this much better.
And even sometimes you get to these dosages and it's like you end up spinning your wheels and or actually getting worse results. You end up having such dramatic organ stress and or insulin resistance and or, you know, fill in the blank issue, whereby you actually make worse results than you would if you had a lower dose with a lower stress response, you know, via whatever various organ systems and or endocrine functions and or whatever the fuck is going on, because you can't even tolerate the fucking drug burden, you know? If you're on so much GH that you become insulin resistant and you're trying to grow, is that necessarily helping you or potentially hindering you in some aspects, you know?
He got tattooed on his face, so that's
So is it better to take steroids younger then? Yeah.
No.
No. Here's one element of it. Well,
nice try, Christian.
We see you, dog.
I would think about it like this. If anybody's thinking about that, going, have you even come close to maximizing your genetic potential? Which is this logarithmic curve of like, yeah, in your first 5 years, you're probably going to get most of it, and depends on how long you would want to like eke out, you know, another pound of muscle every year after certain points. Get the newbie gains, do as much as you can naturally, learn how to fucking train. And if you're approaching it like, I'm lazy and I don't like lifting, but I want to look good, I'm going to take steroids. Wrong answer. Because it ain't going to fix anything. And you're just going to fuck yourself up worse.
Yeah, so like, you know, is 5 years the amount that it takes to max out your genetic potential? Like, I guess, honestly, I think if everything was dialed in from day one, you could probably max it out, you know, in a few years probably, but it's like how many people actually know what they're doing in the kitchen, in the gym from day one. Like, I was a fucking moron when I first, like, started all this, and, like, frankly, it took me years before I understood with a fairly, like, good fundamental understanding of this stuff, to the point where I wasn't, like, cramming mutant mass shakes down my throat and, like, fucking borderline vomiting and then having to eat another meal to replace that because I thought I needed to get, like, 6,000 calories a day regardless. You know, like, that's like what a lot of our first years was when we first got into this shit, was just having exorbitant amounts of food because we didn't understand. There was no people really educating out there. There was no YouTube channels with this kind of stuff. And yeah, so like if you're dialed in from day one, like sure, maybe it's quicker than that. But in general, I think 5 years is like a fairly like reasonable time frame for anybody to like, even from ground zero, if you started not knowing anything, you're probably going to be highly incentivized to learn as you get in the gym because you're going to get bit by the iron bug, like the progress, and be like, how can I maximize this? You'll probably get on the computer and start learning a bit and kind of digging into how to optimize your diet model, sleep hygiene practices, training, shit like that, and end up, you know, starting to develop more, I don't know, optimized protocols in all aspects to the point where, and then you're eventually going to dig into the pharmacology probably. And then you gotta at least, you know, you gotta know that inside out, ideally, you know, how to do, not only read blood work, but as well as order the proper diagnostics and look at organ imaging and have prerequisite elaborate diagnostics to kind of assess what your response to gear even would be, not in a anabolic muscle growth context necessarily, but rather from a stress response context. Like, are you somebody who can even tolerate these drugs? Like, what is your lipid profile like at baseline? What is your cardiac function? What is your ejection fraction? What is your, do you have a fucking pre-existing tumor on your liver? Like, I don't know. Like, this is the kind of shit that, like, I'm not, like, what's the likelihood of that? I'm just saying, like, in general, if you check your blood work, for example, and you have a fucking, you know, liver enzymes through the goddamn roof, you know, is that something you want to then be jumping onto a debulk cycle? You know, like, this kind of stuff, like, you have to weed out everything before you get into it. Like there's some people who just genetically have inferior organs for processing this stuff and can't tolerate anything. You know, they'll take like one cycle of Tren and end up in the fucking hospital potentially. I'm not saying that's common. I'm just saying that some individuals, you know, they'll end up having just some fucking brutal side effect that ends up sidelining them and potentially killing them because they did not do proper diagnostics beforehand. And there are a lot of sad cases of bodybuilders who pass young, even in their 20s, simply because they did not look into this stuff adequately. They don't even check basic shit like blood pressure often, let alone look into their genetic predispositions, getting genetic testing done, looking at if they have, you know, familial hypercholesterolemia, you know, like shit like this that could be potentially managed and or predict your, you know, how well you would respond to a bodybuilding lifestyle and or if it's something you should even pursue to begin with. This is stuff you have to all weed out before you get into it. And it's not something you can just do in 6 to 12 months. You know, try figuring all that out in 6 to 12 months, plus learning how to diet, plus how to train, plus how to do all this shit. It's overwhelming. Like it takes years just to learn it, let alone actually fucking do it in practice. So yeah, definitely agree on that.
Right. So to me, the people who are the best candidates for it, it's like you already lift, you already know how to train, you already have a healthy lifestyle, you are 25 or older or whatever, you're, you know, 30s or 40s and want to start TRT because you've noticed your own sex drive decline or you're depressed or something else, you know, but you have to be in a position where you know how to train.
This guy I know helps the NHL, and he's really knowledgeable, and he also is a scientist, and he's also a guy who actually knows all the details. He's got, because the guys he works with are athletes that can't get caught and need results, right?
Jesus Christ, he's just like outed a fucking NHL guy who like helps him get through doping tests. Interesting. No, I actually outed him by saying his name, but like I'm surprised he like brought it up on a fucking podcast.
With dudes who have like low testosterone, first thing he'll look at is their sleep, how much are they sleeping, and also then he checks their magnesium, zinc, and selenium.
There are
some Balco shit, bro.
Certain things where you go
when they're off your testosterone. Yeah, so
you can't.
When he brings that back up, that's why oysters, they say, because oysters, you can eat one oyster, according to Dom D'Agostino, who's at the College of Florida, and you will get all your zinc, magnesium, and all, certain minerals for the week with one. So oyster shellfish are so fucking good for you. They're one of those super.
Remember ZMA? I used to say.
Oh yeah, I used to.
It sounds like he was like almost sounded like he was referring to Victor Conti, and now they're bringing up ZMA. Funny.
ZMA. Crazy dreams.
Yeah. Right. Really? Always good sleep.
What's that?
Yeah. It was the zinc magnesium. I forgot the A was for, but
B6.
I felt like it was good.
Naturally
EAS made it in a purple can.
Man.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting world to me.
Yeah. But the sleep thing, so people
do
go
something, dude. Get on something.
I'm not getting on all that stuff.
Throw that off a little bit. You're getting 4 hours of sleep.
No, I don't want any of that.
It's impossible to maximize it. You just can't do it.
You got to sleep your 8 hours, man.
Yeah.
8.5.
And that says, sleep and food. It's like, you want to start anabolics?
Yeah.
Start with the anabolic food and sleep that you get.
And then training.
Yeah, so that was, all pretty accurate, and I would agree. So, yeah, as far as tips, this is pretty general guidelines. Like, don't jump into it haphazardly. Don't do dumb shit. Research thoroughly. Understand your, for me, what I would say is understand and have, like, elaborate diagnostics, especially baseline blood work. Have an elaborate panel, pay the money for, even if it's like a $500 panel, you will never see your baseline levels again after you've exposed yourself to this shit. If you want to go back and see what your natural lipid profile was like, what your natural gonadotropin output was like, what your natural SHBG was like, you'll never fucking know for certain if you don't have baseline blood work. And how many guys started anabolics without baseline blood work? The majority. Don't be in that majority who does not have the proper background information to make the most accurate assessments of their health moving forward. If you have some issue that arises, you want to have elaborate information to refer back to and then make the proper educated assessments moving forward and or provide to your, physician who is overseeing you at the time. You want to have as much information available as possible, obviously, before you go into the shit. And it's kind of negligent to not, to be honest. Like, for your own sake and your own health, definitely get all that stuff and understand it too, because it's not just about, getting stuff and going to the gym and eating food and blah, blah, blah. Like, you gotta ideally understand how to read blood work too, is my suggestion. Like, at a minimal understanding a basic lipid profile, CBC, metabolic panel, this kind of shit is going to be pretty crucial for assessing if you are having some sort of red flag that requires like deeper assessment So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed that, learned something potentially. Check out Fighter and the Kid, obviously entertaining podcast. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. My TRT clinic, all telemedicine from the comfort of your own home. All the doctors are vetted by myself personally, represent the quality of information I put out on this channel. And you can expect, high quality oversight as well as proper interpretation of your labs, and not just cookie cutter throwing you on TRT with an anastrozole and other bullshit in order to make a markup on medications. Rather, we also make our money on actual high quality service and interpreting your specific scenario and health parameters and whatnot, and making lifestyle suggestions that may not even involve medication. You got to get your stuff assessed by a professional to understand if this is even a route worth going through, and if it is, how to go about it safely and how to have somebody overseeing you who actually knows their shit. So check that out if it interests you. Anything else I'm associated with, all in the video description below. Gorilla Mind, nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode, pre-workout formulas I designed myself from scratch. Recommended diet model for newbies who are getting into lifting, want to know how to hit not only their macros, but as well as their micronutrient intake, commonly neglected by social media influencers who sell cookie cutter diet models who don't understand fucking anything about nutrition, to be honest, as well as being mindful of sleep hygiene practices, gut health, sports performance, not just, how to gain his muscle and hit my fucking protein. This is a broad spectrum diet model that can be useful for all athletes, in my opinion. Anything else I'm associated with, it's all in the video description below, including the shirts I wear in my videos. So check it out, all down there. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.